It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France. And we have Florence Villemona with us here on the set to help us do that.
Jenny.
Hi, Flo. Today, you're going to focus on higher education, something that a lot of you have asked about here on France 24. Like other countries, of course, France does have a university system. But outside of that framework, there's another network of a small number of very prestigious, highly specialized institutions that are seen as being really the crème de la crème of the school system here.
That's right. Britain has Oxford and Cambridge. The U.S. has the Ivy Leagues. And here in France, we have our own beast, les grandes écoles, the big schools, I guess you could say the great schools. It's our word du jour. Now, there's kind of a collective awareness that it's here and not at universities where the political, engineering, and business elite are educated, or perhaps you might say molded. Now, there's no standard definition or official list, but it's common knowledge that there are about 220 grandes écoles. Some are public, some are private, and some are a lot better than others. I guess you could say the most prestigious grande école is the engineering school Polytechnique, commonly known as l'IX. You also have business schools like HEC and l'ESSEC, the art school, les Beaux-Arts, and perhaps the most famous of all the grandes écoles, the National Administrative School, l'ENA, the ENA.
And attending a grande école pretty much guarantees you a job for life here in France, but only a very select few are actually given the chance to go.
That's right, and that's what's very different from French universities, which are required by law to accept anybody who gets the baccalaureate, the national end of high school exam. It's very different for these grandes écoles. They're very hard to get into. To be admitted, you have to take an extremely competitive national exam called a concours. Now, a lot of students actually study, they take a 2-year preparatory program called a prépa to actually get ready for this exam, this concours. So you basically don't have a life for 2 years, but once you get into this grande école, it pretty much paves a golden career for you afterwards.
Now, these schools are very prestigious, but many people actually accuse that system of having a stranglehold on politics, on big business.
That's right. In fact, there's a very interesting study that was carried out in 2013 that found that over 80% of the top executives in France's 40 biggest companies hailed from just 3 places. So you have HEC, l'ENA, and Polytechnique. So that's the business world. It's also true if you look at the political world. Over 60% of the staff at the Élysée Palace also come from l'ENA and Polytechnique. Bear in mind that these 2 schools just produce 0.057% of French graduates.
Now, the French president himself, François Hollande, actually attended not 1, not 2, but 3 of these grandes écoles, as we say, Sciences Po, ENA, or ENA, as it's known, and the business school HEC or HEC.
That's right, and one of our viewers wanted to know more about this. Let's take a look at his tweet. This is Keith Klotz. He wanted to know about Sciences Po and the university where all the French politicians come from. No, so it's not really a university, it's a grande école, and it's this one that we've been talking about, the ENA, the École nationale de l'administration. It's a good case study for grande école. It's nicknamed the School of Power. It only accepts about 5% of applicants, and it turns out about 100 graduates a year. Now, like other, well, not all, but some other grande écoles, ENA is free. Students are actually paid to study there, but afterwards they owe 10 years of service to the state. Now, graduates from the ENA are called énarques, and there's some very famous énarques, including many former presidents. You have Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, Jacques Chirac, and of course the current president, François Hollande. You can see these class photos they're on the walls of the ENA, and it's kind of like a who's who of who's in politics and who's in business. It's very prestigious, but it's also a very divisive school.
Going to the ENA is an opportunity for social and professional promotion.
It's an archaic institution. For example, students learn that the public sector is better than the private sector, and that a budget should increase every year.
Now, part of the reason critics say these grandes écoles, these great schools like ENA are archaic is because they're not very diverse and they're accused of being elitist.
That's right. Grandes écoles aren't actually as meritocratic as they'd like to be. If you actually look at who goes to these grandes écoles, well, it tends to be the children of the elite, which ensures that power stays in the upper class, mainly white France. And in fact, within certain families from generation to generation, there's a word for this in French. It's called the reproduction sociale, social reproduction. Now, in recent years, there have been attempts to change this. For example, under President Nicolas Sarkozy, the government tried to encourage these grandes écoles to take in 30% of scholarship students and to put in place a system to fast-track the smart students coming from difficult high schools. Let's take a listen.
It helps, especially those of us who never even would have thought of applying.
It shows that even if you come from a so-called troubled high school, you can still want to work and study and succeed.
My dream is to go to a grande école.
But there are critics of this kind of positive discrimination. They tend to say it would devaluate the diploma that you get at these grandes écoles. Let's take a listen.
Employers would ask recent graduates if they had been accepted on the scholarship program or on the normal program. It would be another form of discrimination that would go against the social promotion we're all fighting for.
In today's world, Flo, more and more French people are truly exasperated with what they see as this arrogant, self-perpetuating elite that's completely disconnected with the reality of life.
That's right. Critics of these grandes écoles say that they're actually driving more and more people into the arms of the far right, which is kind of against this kind of elite. But some go even further and say that this archaic elitism is actually holding the country back, because people who go to these grandes écoles are all trained to think the same way, or at least that's what critics say. And therefore, they're really good at producing reports, but they're not that adaptable or as good as thinking outside the box. And so these critics say that, if France wants to survive in a fast-moving international world, well, it really needs to change its mindset when it comes to grandes écoles.
Florence Villeminot, thank you again for another French Connection. Don't forget, if you have any other questions about these schools, the education system, or anything that's going on here in France or about the French, you can always tweet Flo at Flo Villeminot.